Nadia signed the termination letter without looking up. Garrett stood across from her in his dark blue janitor's uniform, saying nothing. He unclipped the key ring from his belt, 17 keys, and set it on the glass surface of her desk. The metal hit glass, and the sound filled the silence. He nodded once and walked out. She didn't raise her head. She didn't know that 3 days from now, the man who'd just left her office would be sitting at the head of her investor table, and the most important person in the room would stand up and call him sir. 3 weeks earlier, Garrett Lockhart walked into Whitmore Dynamics for his first night shift. The building was a 14-story glass tower in downtown Richmond, Virginia, impressive from the highway, but up close showing water stains on the lobby marble and a revolving door that stuck on humid days. At 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, most of the lights were off. The security guard barely looked up when Garrett signed in. The facilities manager, a heavyset man named Dale, with a thermos of coffee permanently in his left hand, handed Garrett a key ring. 17 keys, each one opened a different section of the building. Stairwells, supply closets, server rooms, executive suites, the loading dock, the rooftop access panel, the basement mechanical room. Garrett took the ring and counted them. One by one, he turned each key over in his fingers, checked the teeth, then arranged them along the ring's smallest to largest, brass separated from nickel. Dale watched him. Nobody's ever counted those before. Garrett clipped the ring to his belt. Now somebody has. He started that night with the lobby, mopped in straight lines, east to west, every pass overlapping the last by exactly 2 inches. He moved through the building methodically, floor by floor, stairwell by stairwell. By midnight he'd reached 6. By 2 a.m. he was on 12. He checked every room he entered, not just for dirt, but for what was inside. File cabinets, desk surfaces, whiteboards with numbers still written on them. He noted everything, touched nothing. During the day, Garrett was a different man. He lived in a 2-story White House in Church Hill with his 9-year-old son, Sam. Mornings were scrambled eggs and orange juice, and the kitchen table covered in model airplane parts. They were building a P-51 Mustang together, painting the fuselage olive drab with a detail brush Sam held like a surgeon. Garrett would steady Sam's hand when the lines got tricky, and Sam would lean into his father's arm without thinking about it, the way children do when they've never had a reason to pull away. One evening, Sam looked up from the landing gear assembly. "How come you're always home late now?" Garrett set down a tube of cement. "Because somebody's floors need cleaning." Sam grinned. "That's a weird job. Clean floors matter, buddy." Sam shrugged and went back to the landing gear. 9-year-olds don't interrogate, they accept. And Garrett needed that acceptance more than Sam would ever understand. Nadia Whitmore was 37 years old and had been CEO of Whitmore Dynamics for exactly 2 years, ever since her father's heart stopped in a boardroom chair on the 3rd floor during a Wednesday meeting about quarterly and projections. She hadn't taken his office. She'd taken the one on 14, the highest floor, as if altitude could substitute for authority. She worked until 10 most nights, sometimes later. Her light was always the last one burning in the building. The staff respected her. They also kept their distance. She was too young, too sharp-edged, too clearly the founder's daughter playing at being the founder. And always beside her, steady, calm, deferential, was Victor Kessler, the COO. 52, silver-templed, 20 years with the company. He'd been her father's right hand, and now he stood at Nadia's left, offering counsel with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. On Garrett's 3rd night, Nadia stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor at 11 p.m. and nearly walked into his mop cart. She said sorry without looking at him, the automatic sorry of someone who didn't register what she was apologizing to, and kept walking toward the parking garage. Garrett pulled the cart aside and said nothing. He watched her go, but not because of her. He was watching the folder tucked under her arm. On its cover, printed in sans serif blue, was a logo he recognized. Kellerman Holdings. 4 nights later, Garrett was cleaning the copy room on the 12th floor, Kessler's territory. The executive wing smelled like leather chairs and cold coffee. The paper shredder beside the copier had been run hard. Strips of documents filled the bin, most slight. Garrett picked it up. The header read Kellerman Holdings. Below it, invoice number KH20240-387, billed to Whitmore Dynamics, $340,000. Service description infrastructure consulting Q2 assessment. He set the page aside and reached into the bin, pulling strips methodically, matching torn edges by paper weight and ink color. He reconstructed 3 more partial invoices, different dates, different amounts, same vendor, same vague service line, no deliverables attached, no project codes, just money moving in one direction. He photographed everything, using a phone that wasn't the prepaid he carried for janitor purposes. This one had a biometric lock, military-grade encryption, and an automatic cloud backup to a server in Manhattan. He replaced the strips exactly as he'd found them and finished mopping the floor. By the time he left, you couldn't tell anyone had touched anything except the tile. At 1 a.m., sitting in his truck in the parking lot with the engine off, Garrett called Ruth Tanaka. She answered on the second ring, still at Lockhart Ventures' Manhattan office, 36th floor, probably with a pot of green tea and 3 monitors glowing. "I found what we need," Garrett said. "The COO is running ghost invoices through a shell company registered in Delaware. Kellerman Holdings. Roughly $12 million over 3 years." Silence. Then, "That's enough to kill the deal. You want to pull out?" "Not yet." He looked up at the 14th floor. One light still burning. "I need to know if she's involved." She was Nadia. If the CEO was complicit, the acquisition was dead. If she was a victim, if Kessler had been robbing her while standing at her shoulder, pretending to be her guardian, the equation changed entirely. Ruth paused. "And if she's clean, then we help her." Later that night, Garrett was mopping the 14th floor corridor when he heard Nadia's voice from behind her office door, tight, controlled, the tone of someone defending ground they weren't sure they owned. The conversation ended with a sharp click, and the door opened. She saw him. This time, she actually looked. "You're always here this late? Floors don't clean themselves, ma'am." Nadia paused in the doorway. She glanced down at the tile, immaculate, mop lines straight as ruled paper, the grout cleaner than when the building was new. She frowned, not at the floor but at the gap between what she was seeing and the category she'd filed this man under. "The HVAC system on this floor," she said. "Have you noticed it making a rattling sound late at night? Pressure relief valve on the 14th floor unit is misaligned. It's been cycling inefficiently for at least 6 months, costing you roughly $40,000 a month in excess energy spend." Nadia stood still for 3 seconds. "A janitor doesn't say that. A janitor says, yeah, it's been noisy or I'll put in a work order. A janitor doesn't calculate monthly cost variances on commercial HVAC systems and quote the number to the CEO while holding a mop." She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked to the elevator without another word. The CEO was standing in front of a man who mopped floors and calculated her energy costs more accurately than her CFO, and she had no idea that the man holding the mop was holding the future of her entire company in the other hand. Victor Kessler noticed things. It was what had kept him alive in corporate politics for 2 decades, and what had allowed him to siphon $12 million without anyone asking a question. So when the security footage showed the new night janitor spending 43 minutes in a copy room that took 15 minutes to clean, he paid attention. He called Dale, the new janitor. "Lockhart." What did his background check turn up? Dale pulled the file. It was thin. Name, social security number, Richmond address, clean criminal record, and almost no employment history. No references, no certifications, the kind of file that looked empty because someone had designed it to look empty. "Nothing flagged," Dale said. "He's clean." "Right." Kessler set his phone down. Nothing flagged was exactly what concerned him. In 20 years of corporate survival, he'd learned that people with nothing to hide usually had something to show, a work history that told a story, references that connected to real people. Lockhart's file had none of that. It was a blank wall, and Kessler knew how easy blank walls were to construct because he'd built several himself. He began fabricating a case. He called Dale back and asked him to log 3 formal complaints about cleaning quality on the 12th floor, complaints from employees who hadn't complained, filed under names of staffers who worked day shifts and would never encounter a night janitor. The first cited streaked glass in conference room 12B. The second mentioned an overflowing trash can that had never overflowed. The third alleged an unprofessional interaction with an executive assistant who didn't work evenings. Each complaint was dated, time-stamped, and filed through the standard HR portal. The documentation looked routine, exactly the kind of paper trail that accumulates around employees who aren't working out. Kessler had been fabricating paperwork far longer than he'd been fabricating invoices, and he understood that the secret to a convincing lie was making it boring enough that no one wanted to look closely. That same week, Nadia ran into Garrett again. 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, the overlap hour when her workday was grinding down and his shift was beginning. She'd come to the ground floor break room for coffee because the machine on 14 had been broken for a month and 3 work orders had gone unanswered. She found Garrett kneeling beside the mug rack mounted on the wall. The rack had been hanging at a crooked angle for weeks. 3 screws stripped, mugs sliding sideways every time someone reached for one. Maintenance had been notified. Nothing had happened. Garrett had brought his own tools, a cordless drill, a small bubble level, a Ziploc bag of wall anchors. He was resetting the bracket with the kind of precision that belonged in a machine shop, not a break room. Every movement clean and efficient. Drill out the old anchors, tap in the new ones, drive screws flush, check the level twice. No wasted motion, no second attempts. Nadia poured her coffee and watched over the rim. Doesn't facilities handle this? Garrett didn't look up. They do. Rack's still broken though. She sipped. He finished the last screw, tested the rack with a firm downward pull, then hung all 6 mugs back in a neat row. Level, secure. Done in under 4 minutes. Nadia found herself almost smiling, not quite, but close enough to notice. The first time a janitor had come anywhere near making her smile since she'd taken the corner office on 14. The next morning, she called HR and asked for Garrett Lockhart's complete personnel file. They sent it within the hour. She read it in under a minute because there was almost nothing to read. No previous employer contacts, no emergency contact except an unverified Manhattan number. No certifications, no training records, no performance reviews from prior positions. Miss Whitmore, the HR coordinator said, sounding mildly confused by the request. He's just a janitor. Nadia hung up. The sentence bothered her the way a door that won't latch bothers you. You keep pushing it closed, and it keeps drifting open, and you can't figure out why. After his shift ended at 3 a.m., Garrett drove home through empty Richmond streets, the streetlights on Broad casting long yellow pools across asphalt. He checked on Sam asleep, one arm around a stuffed bear, the P-51 fuselage drying on newspaper on his desk, the cockpit canopy still waiting to be glued, then sat down in the spare bedroom he'd converted into something that didn't match the rest of the house. He opened a titanium-cased laptop. Biometric login. 2-factor authentication into Lockhart Ventures' secure server through an encrypted VPN routed through 3 jurisdictions. The screen filled with dashboards, fund metrics, and a folder labeled WD Due Diligence Confidential. Ruth had uploaded Whitmore Dynamics' public financial filings, 3 years of quarterlies, annual reports, auditors' signed letters, board minutes from regulatory filings. Garrett cross-referenced them methodically against what he'd seen on Kessler's desk and in the shredder bin: internal invoices, vendor payment schedules, the Kellerman Holdings contracts. The gap was $12.4 million over 36 months. Every dollar routed to Kellerman, and Kellerman had produced nothing: no reports, no analysis, no consulting deliverables, no emails between any Kellerman employee and anyone at Whitmore. The company existed in wire transfers and filing cabinets, nowhere else. It was a hole in the floor covered by a rug, and Kessler had been walking across it every day for 3 years with his hand on Nadia's shoulder, smiling. He closed the laptop at 4 a.m. In 5 hours, he'd be making pancakes for Sam. In 17 hours, he'd be mopping Kessler's floor again, emptying the trash next to the shredder, cleaning the evidence of a crime still in progress. The next afternoon, Nadia called a strategy session for department heads. Conference room on 14, 12 people around a long walnut table, tablets open, coffee cups forming a perimeter around each seat. Kessler stood at the front, slides projected behind him, his voice modulated with the polish of a man who'd given 1,000 presentations and never once been questioned. We've achieved $3.2 million in vendor optimization savings this quarter, Kessler said, clicking to a pie chart in corporate blue, largely through contract renegotiations and vendor consolidation. The door opened. Garrett pushed his trash cart in, moving along the wall toward the wastebasket near the window. He worked slowly, liner out, new liner in. Old liner nodded and dropped in the cart. His eyes passed over the projection screen for 2 seconds. He didn't need longer. The number was there, 3.2 million. He knew exactly where it had gone, and it wasn't vendor optimization. It was a mailbox in Wilmington, Delaware. The meeting ended. People filed out, talking in the low murmur of professionals who'd been told everything was fine and had no reason to doubt it. Nadia stayed. She sat alone at the table, rubbing her temples with both hands, staring at the slide deck still frozen on the screen, the pie chart, the savings number, the bullet points about consolidation. Something about it felt wrong, like a note slightly out of tune in a chord she couldn't quite identify. Garrett came back for the last wastebasket, the one by the door, the one he'd deliberately skipped. He lifted the liner, tied it off, dropped it in the cart. Then he stopped. His hand rested on the cart handle. He could feel the line he was about to cross. He knew he shouldn't say anything. He said it anyway. The vendor savings number in Mr. Kessler's slide. It doesn't match the invoices on his desk. Nadia's head came up. Her eyes sharpened the way they did when someone stepped into territory she hadn't expected to defend. You read invoices on the COO's desk? I empty the trash on the COO's desk. The invoices sit next to the trash. He held her gaze 1 second longer than a janitor should. That's all. He pushed the cart through the door and left without looking back. Behind him, Nadia's fingers tightened around the pen in her hand until the plastic cap cracked down the middle. Nadia wanted to believe him. That was the part that frightened her, not that a janitor had questioned her COO's numbers, but that her gut said the janitor was right. She'd spent 2 years learning to override her instincts with process, to wait for data before acting, to never give the board a reason to question whether she'd earned her chair or inherited it. Believing a night janitor over a 20-year COO wasn't process. It was the opposite of process. It was the kind of impulsive, emotional judgment call that got young CEOs removed by boards already looking for an excuse. So she compromised. She would ask Kessler about the discrepancy carefully, casually, without revealing where the question came from. Victor. She kept her voice light, almost offhand, the way she'd taught herself to raise sensitive topics without signaling alarm. Kellerman Holdings, what exactly do they deliver for us? I'm reviewing some of our longer vendor relationships. Kessler didn't flinch. Not a blink, not a shifted weight, not a single tell. His face remained exactly as composed as it had been the moment before the question landed. Infrastructure consulting. Nadia. Your father signed the original contract himself. It's a legacy vendor. I've been managing the relationship personally for years to keep the overhead low. A lie. But dressed in her father's name and wrapped in the language of filial loyalty. And Nadia couldn't strip it away without stripping something she wasn't ready to lose. Kessler tilted his head, a small gesture, almost gentle. Who asked you about this? Nadia said nothing. The silence answered for her. Kessler's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes recalculated the way a chess player reassesses the board when a pawn moves to an unexpected square. That evening, he found her alone in her office. He closed the door, something he rarely did, and sat across from her with the posture of a concerned mentor delivering difficult advice. The night janitor. Lockhart. His voice was measured, each word placed with deliberateness. Security footage shows him in restricted areas on 12, outside his cleaning zone. 3 documented complaints about his work quality, and he's been approaching you directly after hours. Alone. He leaned forward, letting the implications settle before he continued. Nadia, if the board finds out you've been taking business counsel from a member of the cleaning staff, they will question your judgment, and frankly, they'll be right to question it. The sentence landed exactly where it was designed to land, on the bruise that never healed. The one that whispered she wasn't enough. She wasn't ready. She was playing pretend in her dead father's company, while the adults waited for her to fail. Nadia turned her chair toward the window. Richmond spread below in the late afternoon light, the James River catching gold through the trees, the rooftops of neighborhoods she drove through every day without noticing. Handle it, she said. Her hand trembled against the armrest. She knew in the part of herself she'd spent 2 years learning to ignore that she had just chosen wrong. She didn't have the nerve to choose right. The CEO had just handed the fate of the only person telling her the truth to the only person telling her lies. And it would take her exactly 3 days to learn what that cost. The termination meeting happened in Nadia's office on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. October light came through the 14th floor windows at a low angle, casting long shadows. Kessler had arranged the chairs so he sat in the authority position directly across from Garrett, with Nadia offset to his left. Present but peripheral. A witness, not a decision-maker. He'd written the termination letter himself. Kessler read the causes aloud. Unauthorized access to restricted areas. 3 documented complaints about cleaning quality, failure to adhere to company cultural standards regarding employee management interactions. Each reason was 1 sentence long, each one fabricated with the same precision he used on invoices, plausible enough to survive a glance, hollow enough to collapse under scrutiny, but nobody scrutinizes a janitor's termination. Garrett listened with his hands on his knees, his face composed, and nodded not in agreement, but in recognition. The nod of a man hearing exactly what he expected. He signed the form. No protest, no questions. Then he unclipped the key ring. 17 keys. He held the ring for a moment, feeling the weight, the same weight he'd measured on his first night, the same count he'd performed while Dale watched in confusion. He set them on Nadia's desk, not Kessler's. On Nadia's glass desktop deliberately, the metal striking the surface with a sound that filled the room. He stood. For the first time, he looked directly at Nadia, not upward, not deferential. Level, equal, the way 2 people look at each other when the distance between them has been artificial all along. He leaned forward slightly and spoke low enough that only she could hear. Check the Kellerman Holdings invoices. All of them. Then he walked out. Past reception. Past the elevator. He took the stairs 14 flights, the same stairs he'd climbed every night for 3 weeks. He took them one last time. That night, Nadia couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment on West Grace Street, hearing his voice. Not the words, the certainty behind them. At 2 a.m., she drove to the office, let herself in through the garage, and took the elevator to 14. The building was dark. No mop cart in the hallway. No one cleaning tonight. She pulled every Kellerman Holdings invoice. 3 years. 47 invoices. $12.4 million. No deliverables. No confirmation emails. No project codes. No contact person other than a generic address. Registered location. A mailbox in Wilmington, Delaware, Unit 412, $89 a month. The company had no website, no employees, no public record of existence beyond its incorporation filing. $12.4 million had flowed out of Whitmore Dynamics into a rented post office box. Every invoice approved by the same signature. Victor Kessler. Nadia sat in her dark office a long time after that. The 14th floor was silent, more silent than she'd ever heard it, because for the first time in 3 weeks, no janitor was working through the night. The next morning, her phone rang. A woman's voice, professional and precise. "This is Ruth Tanaka, Managing Director at Lockhart Ventures. Our fund is evaluating Whitmore Dynamics for a $90 million acquisition proposal. Our principal has concerns regarding internal financial integrity. He will attend your investor meeting this Friday." Nadia wrote the name on a notepad. Lockhart Ventures. She circled it twice, but she didn't connect it. Nobody connects the name on a billion-dollar fund to the name on a janitor's termination form, not yet. Friday morning. The 14th floor conference room had been arranged with the precision that matters only when large amounts of money are at stake. Water pitchers centered, name cards in serif font, the projection system tested twice. Nadia had prepared more thoroughly for this meeting than any in her 2 years as CEO. She knew about Kessler now. She knew about Kellerman, but she hadn't had time to act. Dismantling a COO required legal counsel, board alignment, and a replacement plan. She needed the investors stable first. Douglas Mercer arrived first. 68 years old, retired Army colonel, Whitmore Dynamics' largest individual investor at 14%. Straight back, steady eyes, a handshake that communicated nothing except the expectation that things would proceed on schedule. Wire-rimmed glasses perfectly level. He'd known Nadia's father for 30 years. Kessler arrived next. Gray suit, burgundy tie, monogrammed portfolio. He shook hands with the practiced warmth of a man who'd perfected the art of being trusted. He sat across from Mercer, crossed one leg, and opened his portfolio as though the meeting were already a formality. 3 more investors took their seats. Nadia glanced at the empty chair at the far head of the table. No name card. Ruth Tanaka's call had mentioned a principal attending. The door opened. Garrett walked in, not in coveralls. Not in the uniform she'd last seen across her desk. He wore a charcoal two-button suit, cut close, no pocket square. A navy tie. A Breitling on his left wrist. But it was his walk that changed everything. The man who'd pushed a mop cart moved through the room like he was clearing a space, deliberate, unhurried, aware of every angle and person without appearing to look at any of them. Ruth Tanaka followed 2 steps behind, a black leather portfolio under her arm. Douglas Mercer saw him. The old colonel's face changed, not surprise but recognition. The deep kind, the kind that involves shared history and shared memory of places most people will never go. Mercer pushed back his chair and stood 68 years old, and he rose like it was a reflex encoded in his spine. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took Garrett's hand in both of his, and held it. "Sir, it's been too long." The room went still. Kessler's pen touched the table and stopped moving. Nadia felt the air leave her lungs. Garrett returned the handshake firm, brief. Then he walked to the empty chair at the head of the table and sat down. Ruth placed her portfolio in front of him. "Lockhart Ventures holds the controlling interest in the acquisition proposal before this board," Ruth said. "Mr. Lockhart has been conducting due diligence on Whitmore Dynamics personally. On site, for the past 3 weeks." Nadia's eyes dropped to Garrett's hands folded on the table, still and composed. The same hands that had set 17 keys on her desk 3 days ago, the same hands that had mopped her hallway, fixed the mug rack, emptied Kessler's trash, same calluses, same hands. Garrett opened his laptop. 47 invoices appeared on the screen. Kellerman Holdings, each dated and itemized. Then the Delaware registration. Then the mailbox address. Then the void. No deliverables, no correspondence, no work product. $12.4 million, he said. His voice was level, the cadence of someone trained to deliver intelligence briefings, not someone trying to persuade. Over 3 years, through a shell company with no operations, no employees, and no product. Every invoice approved by the same individual. This is why Lockhart Ventures has not signed. Kessler's face went white in stages, first the cheeks, then the lips, then the skin around his eyes. But he recovered, or tried to. He straightened his tie, placed both hands flat on the table, and spoke with the practiced calm of a man who'd been lying professionally for years. "This is defamation. I will have my attorneys." Garrett didn't look at Kessler. He looked at Nadia, his eyes finding hers across the length of the table. "Miss Whitmore was not involved. I've verified that independently." The sentence was a shield, and he placed it in front of her before anyone in the room could think to point a finger. In 7 words, he'd separated her from the crime, publicly, in front of every investor who mattered. Douglas Mercer's voice cut through the silence the way only a former battalion commander's voice can. "Son." The word was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a finality that left no room for the sentence Kessler had been building. "I've known this man since he was running intelligence operations in Kandahar province. We served under the same flag. If he says the money's gone, it's gone. Sit down." Kessler stopped talking. His mouth closed, and something behind his eyes went dark, the slow shutdown of a man who has run out of lies and knows it. Mercer turned to Nadia. His expression wasn't kind, it was fair, which is harder. "You didn't know. I believe that. But now you know. The question, Miss Whitmore, is what you intend to do about it." Nadia stood. Her hand was steady when she pressed the intercom button on the conference phone. "Security to the 14th floor conference room, please." 2 guards arrived within 90 seconds. Kessler looked at Garrett one last time across the table, not with anger, not with indignation, with the hollow recognition of a man who understood, at last, that he had lost on the first day, the day the new night janitor took a key ring from Dale's hand and counted every single key. They escorted him out. The conference room door closed with a soft click. The room emptied slowly after that, Mercer shaking Garrett's hand again, a longer handshake this time, Ruth collecting documents into her portfolio, the other investors filing out with the stunned quiet of people who'd just watched a building's foundation get replaced while they were standing on it. Then it was just the 2 of them. Garrett stood by the window, looking out over Richmond, the James River glinting in the late morning light, the bridges arching over brown water, the rooftops of Church Hill visible in the northeast distance. Nadia stood 3 steps behind him. The silence between them had weight, not uncomfortable, but heavy, the kind that happens when 2 people have run out of pretense and haven't yet found what comes after. "I fired you," she said. "You did. You let me fire you." "Also true." "Why?" He turned from the window. He looked at her without rank or pretense, or the protective distance of a uniform. "Because I needed to know what you'd do when you learned the truth." Without knowing who I was, Nadia understood. He'd been testing her character, whether she would protect herself or protect the truth. She'd passed not elegantly, not quickly. She'd spent 2 days ignoring the evidence, 1 day enabling the wrong person, and 1 night alone in a dark office at 2 a.m. pulling invoices. But when the evidence was clear, she chose truth over the comfort of pretending. Her eyes reddened. She didn't cry. She nodded once and walked out of the conference room without looking back. He could have revealed himself on the first day. He could have walked in as Garrett Lockhart of Lockhart Ventures, demanded the books, and uncovered Kessler before sundown. But he chose to mop floors, empty trash cans, fix a broken mug rack, and wait. Not because he needed the evidence. His legal team could have obtained that with subpoenas in a week. Because he needed to know whether she deserved the company her father had built, whether the daughter was worthy of the building that still carried his name. 1 week later, Nadia stood before the board of directors in the same conference room where Kessler had been removed. She presented the full scope of the fraud, the shell company, the invoices, the $12.4 million, and took complete responsibility for the failure of oversight. She didn't blame her father's legacy arrangements. She didn't cite Kessler's 20 years of institutional trust. She didn't wrap excuses in context or soften the facts with mitigating circumstances. She owned it, all of it, standing straight at the podium, voice steady, hands visible. The board voted. Confidence retained, 9-2. For the first time in 2 years, Nadia sat in the CEO's chair and felt it was hers, not her father's memory, not the ghost of a man whose name was still on the lobby wall. Hers. She looked around the table at the faces that had just voted for her, and she understood that she'd earned it the only way that counted, not by inheriting it, and not by performing competence, but by standing in front of a room and saying the hardest sentence a leader can say: "I didn't see it, and I should have." On a Saturday afternoon in late October, she drove to Church Hill. The trees along the route were turning amber and deep red, the last gold of Indian summer clinging to the upper branches. Garrett's house was a 2-story white clapboard on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that looked exactly like what it was, nothing hidden, nothing advertised. A wooden porch with a bench, a bicycle leaning against the railing, a jack-o'-lantern on the top step, carved with more enthusiasm than skill. Sam's work, clearly. Sam opened the front door. He was holding the P-51 Mustang model, almost finished now, fuselage fully painted, propeller loosely attached, only the wing decals remaining. He looked up at Nadia with the uncomplicated friendliness of a 9-year-old who assumes all visitors are welcome until proven otherwise. "Are you looking for my dad?" Garrett appeared behind him. Flannel shirt and jeans, not the charcoal suit, not the janitor's coveralls. Somewhere in between, the place where he actually lived. Nadia held up her hand. In it was the key ring. 17 keys, still arranged smallest to largest, brass separated from nickel. The same keys she'd watched him set on her desk. The same keys she'd kept in her coat pocket for a week, without knowing why. "You forgot these." Garrett looked at the keys, then at her. "I didn't forget them. I gave them to you." The silence held for exactly as long as it needed to, not a second longer, not a second shorter. Sam tugged Nadia's sleeve. "Do you want to see my airplane? It's almost done. I just need the decals, and Dad says I have to wait for the glue to cure, but I think it's ready." Nadia looked at Garrett. He stepped back from the doorway and opened the door wider. Not an invitation spoken, just a door opened. She walked in. In the kitchen, 3 mugs on the counter, coffee for the adults, milk for Sam in a grown-up mug because he'd insisted, because airplane cups were for babies and he was 9. Garrett didn't explain his past. Nadia didn't ask. They talked about the model airplane. Sam did most of the talking, explaining the P-51's Rolls-Royce Merlin engine with the confident inaccuracy of a child who's memorized facts without quite understanding them. They talked about the HVAC system on the 14th floor, and Garrett mentioned the valve would need full replacement by December. They talked about Richmond in autumn, the trees along Monument Avenue, turning the color of rust and wine, the farmer's market on Saturdays, the way the river smelled different when the temperature dropped. Nothing heavy, everything light, but nothing in that kitchen was ordinary, and all three of them, even Sam, in the way that children sense things they can't name, knew it. A month later, Whitmore Dynamics had stabilized. The fraud had been referred to federal prosecutors. The books were clean, and the company's valuation had actually increased. Analysts interpreted the cleanup as leadership strength. Lockhart Ventures completed its investment, but not as an acquisition, a partnership, equal terms. Garrett didn't take a board seat. Ruth Tanaka represented the fund at quarterly meetings. Garrett kept his distance from the company, but not from Nadia. It started with work emails, follow-ups on the restructuring, legal questions about the prosecution, then messages outside business hours, not about work. A restaurant on East Main, an article about HVAC efficiency she sent as a joke. He replied with a 3-paragraph analysis she read twice. Then Sunday morning's coffee at a bakery on Carey Street, while Sam played soccer at Bird Park. The two of them at a corner table watching a 9-year-old chase a ball he rarely caught. No declaration, no grand gesture. Just two people who kept choosing to sit a little closer. On a Tuesday evening in late October, Garrett returned to the Whitmore Dynamics building one final time. Not as a janitor, not as an investor. He carried a toolbox through the lobby, nodded to the security guard, the same guard who'd barely looked up on his first night, and took the elevator to 14. Then the stairs to the roof. Nadia found him 20 minutes later, after the guard called her office. "Ma'am, Mr. Lockhart is on the roof," with a wrench. She took the stairs. She opened the rooftop door and found him kneeling beside the HVAC unit, sleeves rolled, adjusting the pressure relief valve he'd told her about on the night they first spoke. The valve that had been costing $40,000 a month. The one nobody had fixed. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him work against the Richmond skyline. "You run a billion-dollar fund, and you're up here fixing an air conditioner." Garrett didn't turn around. $40,000 a month. Somebody had to fix it. Nadia laughed. Not the measured sound she deployed in boardrooms. A real laugh, sudden, unguarded, the kind that escapes before you decide whether to let it, the kind that belongs to the person underneath the title. On Nadia's desk on the 14th floor, beside the framed photograph of her father, there now stood a completed P-51 Mustang model, olive drab fuselage, white star insignia on each wing, propeller that spun when you blew on it. Sam had finished it on a Saturday morning while Nadia held the decal sheet steady, and Garrett watched from the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee he forgot to drink. And in Garrett's house in Church Hill, beside the front door, a new hook had been mounted on the wall brass, simple, screwed in level. Hanging from it was a key ring, 17 keys, smallest to largest, brass separated from nickel. They didn't open any door in the Whitmore Dynamics building anymore. They were just the reason she'd walked through his door the first time. Every door in the building had a lock, but the one that mattered never did.